Saudi Arabia has been ramping up spending by the billions of dollars. They had surpassed Singapore's GIC with more than $31 billion spent last year. How important is Saudi Arabia strategically in a world where we're seeing financing, fundraising really slowing down at a rapid clip?
Especially for that reason, because other pools of capital are still hesitant. You're seeing a lot of the deal makers flood to the Middle East, and especially PIF, the Saudi Sovereign Fund, to try and get a hold of their capital because they are still willing to fund freely. And that is part of the strategy. In fact, for much of the last 10 years, Saudi Arabia has used its sovereign wealth funds as a tool to diversify its economy away from oil, to modernize Saudi Arabia, but also as a tool for soft power on the global stage.
OK, let's say that soft power, Sri, turns out to be a problem. And let's say the region becomes increasingly inflamed in the way that potentially it could do. Are these funds running a risk going to Saudi Arabia? And how does that factor into their thinking?
It probably doesn't. Look, right now they have lots of capital to spend. If you look at the top 10 spenders last year in terms of transaction activity, about 5 of the top 10 spots were the big Gulf sovereign wealth funds. Look at the size of these funds. It's not just Saudi Arabia. Look at UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, all these places. When you add places like Bahrain and Oman, you're talking about $4 trillion in assets. That is a lot of money that is not going away. The PIF, the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund, is $760 billion in size. By 2030, they aim to grow it to $2 trillion. Yes, regional conflicts are a big problem. It is in their interest to make sure that they can play a leading role in seeing to it that it is contained, but the war chest that they have isn't going away. And that is why last month we had a fascinating story of one of the family offices in Abu Dhabi. Listen, it's not just the sovereign funds. Even family offices there have a growing pool of capital. Well, and they actually said every investor coming in there they're meeting 4 or 5 global managers every single day, almost like a daily Davos.
Well, it's amazing because, yeah, the daily Davos is interesting. And we should say that Davos of the Desert event is actually coming to Miami this year. So Saudi Arabia coming to the United States also to court new capital. We should talk about the flip side, because while Saudi Arabia is ramping up spending in a year where bankers are expecting IPOs, private equity funds are looking for money, GIC cut its amount of capital spent by 46%. Temasek also cut. How much struggle is there in the rest of the world when it comes to seeking capital?
And that's what's interesting about the transaction activity that we've seen in 2023. GIC, Temasek obviously had big slowdowns in the amount of their spending, but their returns have also not been great. Both of them posted poor numbers for 2023. In fact, if you look across the entire sovereign wealth fund pool, the entire spending activity there reduced by 20%, which is in keeping with what we saw across any of the firms that are managing large pools of capital, because of the kind of year 2023 was. It was a mixed bag. It was all over the place, and people were willing to be cautious. Not so at PIF, but elsewhere, caution was certainly the key word.